Thank you very much, Excellencies, President of the Human Rights Council, High Commissioner, distinguished representatives. It's a great honor this morning to address this distinguished forum as Vice Chair of the United Nations Expert Mechanism on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. I am deeply grateful for the opportunity to contribute to this very important dialogue today, which reflects our shared commitment to the promotion and protection of the rights of Indigenous peoples worldwide. In doing so, we reaffirm the foundational principles of democracy, participation, inclusion, and accountability, which are essential to ensuring that Indigenous voices are not only heard, but meaningfully integrated into decision-making processes at all levels. Biodiversity is essential not only for maintaining climatic stability, but also for supporting all aspects of human coexistence. It underpins both present and future global macroeconomic stability, which are deeply interconnected with democratic principles, environmental sustainability. Moreover, biodiversity is intrinsically linked to cultural diversity. Indigenous peoples are critical allies in protecting human rights and the environment. Thanks to their ancestral scientific knowledge and sustainable practices, the world has managed to preserve part of this biodiversity. The preservation of traditional Indigenous knowledge and biological biodiversity can be achieved only by guaranteeing the right to self-determination of Indigenous peoples. The dependency of Indigenous peoples on biological diversity and their unique role in conserving life on Earth has been recognized by the United Nations through many international instruments. In particular, the Convention on Biological Diversity, the Sustainable Development Goals 2030, and through provisions of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, adopted by the General Assembly in 2007. The effective exercise and enjoyment of Indigenous peoples' rights appears to have become a matter of urgency, not only for Indigenous peoples, but for our societies at large. The preservation of traditional Indigenous knowledge and biological biodiversity can only be achieved by guaranteeing the right to self-determination of Indigenous peoples and recognizing the legitimacy and the importance of Indigenous peoples' knowledge and lifeways. The United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, including in its preamble, affirms the diverse rights attached to lands, territories, and resources. There is an essential dynamic between the rights of Indigenous people to land, territories, and resources and the right to maintain biodiversity. In addressing the pressing issue of the climate crisis, it is imperative to recognize that Indigenous peoples consistently find themselves at the forefront, bearing the consequences that extend to their livelihoods and sustenance. Article 20 of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples unequivocally asserts their entitlement to the pursuit of self-sustenance, development, and the unrestricted engagement in traditional and alternative economic endeavors. The expert mechanism on the rights of Indigenous peoples has been mandated to assist member states in achieving the goals of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. The Declaration, in its Article 29, states that Indigenous peoples have the right to conservation and protection of their environment and the productive capacity of their lands, territories, and resources. States should ensure that Indigenous peoples' rights are respected when expanding protected areas, mitigating climate change, and carrying out conservation projects. Indigenous peoples should be part of any decision-making in such situations. Recognize and respect the value of Indigenous peoples' scientific and technical knowledge, practices, and innovations in green projects. This includes incorporating Indigenous knowledge of biodiversity, the environment, and sustainable resource management practices. Despite their contributions to sustainability, Indigenous peoples increasingly face profound threats from climate change, biodiversity loss, and unsustainable development. The disruption of ecological functions, such as shifts in species distributions, loss of endemic biodiversity, and degradation of seascapes and landscapes, all pose existential challenges. These risks are exacerbated by large-scale conservation and climate change mitigation projects, including carbon credit markets and renewable energy projects, which are frequently implemented without respecting Indigenous peoples' right to free, prior, and informed consent. I would like to conclude by saying that the protection of Indigenous peoples' rights is a democratic imperative. The preservation of biodiversity, the fight against climate change, and the safeguarding of cultural heritage all depend on inclusive governance that respects Indigenous self-determination and knowledge systems. Democracy at its core demands participation, transparency, and accountability. These principles must guide our collective efforts to ensure that Indigenous peoples are not merely consulted, but are empowered as equal partners in shaping sustainable futures. Upholding their rights is essential to building resilient societies and a healthy planet for generations to come. I thank you.